Welcome to the Indie Fantasy Club, where today we are going to be reviewing Petition by Delilah Waan. Now, Delilah mentioned in the comments a few times that she's perfectly fine with a book roast.
So I hope she's ready for me to tear into this.
I'm kidding. I actually really did want to find something to roast about this book because she kept saying that, but this was honestly one of the most well-written books that I've read in a long time, including trad publishing. In fact, it was so well done that I'm shocked it wasn't picked up by a publisher. That's the level of quality that we're talking about here. So what was this book about? At its core, it was about a young woman who was just trying to do anything that she had to do to climb out of poverty, to escape the suffocating debts and expectations that were placed upon her. Now, despite being a gifted magic user, Rahilu must still petition for an opportunity to be sponsored by one of the great houses, to develop her skills, to get an income, and to improve her life. And although the rules say that anyone can participate, it's rare that someone who's common born actually makes it through, because the houses want their own people to actually get through and sponsored, etc., etc. So with that context in mind, let's dive into this indie review. I don't know what it is about Asian-inspired fantasy, but it is just so immersive. They do such a good job with it. It had a very similar feel to it as like the Sword of Kaigen, where it's not necessarily a small village like the Sword of Kaigen, but it's this Asian-inspired city instead. But it was just so immersive that I had to give it a 9 out of 10. Because it's on a smaller scale of a city rather than a kingdom or a world, I feel like she's able to dive in a little bit deeper into these local cultures and customs that they have. And Delilah just does a really good job of letting us experience these things with the character from Rahilu's point of view. You've got house politics that are touched on, but because Rahilu doesn't understand house politics because she's common born, and therefore she doesn't understand the intricacies of the wealthier classes, we as readers are left with a little bit of ambiguity, which is kind of cool. We also get to experience this world from a commoner's point of view, a fisherman's point of view. There's lots of fishing references, and that location by the sea just gives us a lot of vivid descriptions. The petition process itself that they have to follow is all about the traditions and laws of this city and of these houses, and it just feels ingrained into their society, even if it is broken or manipulated. And on top of all that, she really does a good job crafting a vernacular around this world. So I can tell she put a lot of effort into the money system, their measurement of time, the seasons. All these things had their own naming conventions, and she really doesn't hold your hand through it. She just like plops you into the story. You have to catch up. You have to experience it with her. And I like that she doesn't hold our hands and explain everything and tell us everything that's going on. She really just throws us in, and we have to really work to catch up to fully understand the scope of this world. So it is just incredibly, incredibly immersive, really well written, really well done. The names I gave an 8 out of 10. The story is told through Rahilu's perspective, so her character does feel very deep and well developed. We understand her motivations, and the stakes of her petition are very tangible. She also did a really good job with many of the side characters, like her mother, Neris, and even Gardon with his little OCD quirks that he has. But I did feel like at times the characters relied on tropes a little bit too heavily, which made them a little bit more predictable, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing because the tropes weren't bad, but there was just maybe a little bit lack of uniqueness from some of the characters, just from a personality perspective. Like I said, I liked Gardon, the fact that he was always needed a clean tunic and hated to be on the ground. Like, that was so memorable to me, and such a small detail that just really stuck in the back of my mind. And someone that I felt like needed more of that was like Lorne. Lorne to me served as a tool of the story, and he did have some of that character depth, but I just wanted more from Lorne. He was the one where I just wanted more development from his character, especially with how involved he's going to be, I think, in future stories. But overall, the characters, their decisions, everything was believable, and you really got a sense of the societal and cultural expectations within the story. So all of the people in here felt real. The decisions felt authentic. So I have to give credit for that. The magic, I would give a 10. But be warned, I would call this book advanced adult fantasy. Just because the magic system is very intricate and complex, and Delilah does not hold your hand. She expects you as a reader to just pick up and understand things and follow. She does explain the magic system, but she does it in little bits and pieces as we go through the story. So we are really experiencing this. Again, that's what made it so immersive, is this magic system was a part of the world. It was not separate. It was fully integrated with how these people interacted with each other. And it just made it very engaging, but it was very complex. But again, I'm a simple reader. I am not always good with hard magic systems, but I can respect them. And I understand the quality of this hard magic system that she's written, and it is on par with some of the best hard magic systems I've ever read. If you are an indie author, you need to look at this book as an example of how to craft a hard magic system if you plan to use that in your story. So since I have no notes about things that I would change or my feedback on the magic system, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. The magic is super unique. It's based on emotion, and the way she constructed it is just so creative. So there are 6 resonance disciplines, is what she calls it. And it's broken into 2 categories. There's like time-related magic and there's empathic related magic. So the 3 time-related magics are evocation, which allows people to tap into objects or people in order to see the past. There's augury, which allows these people to see potential futures based on emotional decisions and responses. And there's fortunement. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't fully understand fortunement. That one was a little bit over my head, but she describes it as basically the art of change. Now, on the empathic side of the magic system, we have projection, which allows a person to project an emotion externally onto another person. We have obfuscation, which is basically the shield against that, and it hides their emotions so their deeds and actions and emotions can't really be tracked. And then there's seeking, which allows someone to see into a person to get the truth. And there are a lot of costs and consequences to using this magic system. If they use too much of it, they get resonance backlash. It basically makes them unable to use magic for like a day. They have limited amounts that they can do. So what they do to enhance that is they use crystals to give them more power, and they do a thing called imbuement, which basically allows them to channel emotions into a crystal, which they can then draw upon at a later time. But if they overdraw, they can shatter the crystal. Again, it is very well developed. There's very clear cost, very clear limitations, very direct consequences, and the rules are just set up so well, and they're integrated in such a way that they're portrayed masterfully by this author. The overall infrastructure of the book, I gave a 9 out of 10. If you told me this book was traditionally published, I would believe you. That's just how well structured it was. It was about as professionally done as I've seen. You get just those promises in the beginning. You know the stakes. You feel with the character as you progress slowly along this journey with Rahilu as she's trying to climb out of poverty. You're introduced to her at her lowest of circumstances. You see all of her struggles as she tries to submit her petition. You get to see her go through even more challenges as she progresses in achieving her goals. And you see what she's willing to do to get there. Unlike a lot of these other houseborns, she cannot afford to lose. And you really feel that tension and that difference and that conflict between the different characters. And she just folds in the plot so well into the story that it is character driven, but everything feels like it has a purpose, that it's driving towards a conclusion. The way she sprinkled in the larger scope of the story through a lower stakes environment was very well done. Now, the only reason it didn't get a 10 for me is because I just felt like the stakes were lower than what I would prefer. The payoff to me wasn't as rewarding just because of, again, the scope of what she's trying to accomplish. It was really well done, and there was plenty of surprises and just depth to this story that I wasn't expecting. And the resolution really was realistic. It wasn't a happy ending necessarily. It was a realistic ending that left me wanting more. So the pacing, the prose, everything about this, very professional. Really enjoyed it. Really good job. Now that brings us to enjoyment. Again, this is a very preference category. And so with that said, I gave this one a 7 out of 10 on the enjoyment scale. Now let me tell you why. Before you jump to conclusions, I just want to say that I anticipate the second book in this series to be a much higher score on the enjoyment scale, and I do plan to read it. But let me tell you why the first book got a lower score. It was because of the scale. That's basically what it boiled down to for me. Basically, because we're just watching one young woman rise and pull herself out of poverty, it's interesting, but it just didn't have the same high stakes of something like an epic fantasy where the whole world or the whole kingdom is at stake if they fail. In this case, if Rahilu fails, her family just goes back to being fishermen, being in debt, living day to day. And while you don't want that for this character, you do feel for her, you do root for her. It's just the consequences of that feel so small right now in this book. Now, with that said, this is why I'm excited for book 2, because she does hint at quite a bit and provide foreshadowing for things to come. And it leaves plenty of room to grow and expand and become a higher stakes story. Now, that's just my preference. I like high stakes stories. When I was telling my wife about this, she was saying that this was the kind of story that she would be more interested in because it was lower stakes fantasy and you get to see really personal, familial goals, ambitions, and drive where you can focus on rooting for one person and one family as opposed to being overwhelmed by an entire world. I do think that that's an audience thing where if you like lower stakes fantasy, this is a phenomenal book. Phenomenal book. You will love this, I promise. And if you like higher stakes fantasy, there is potential for higher stakes in the coming books. I don't know for sure, I haven't read it, but that's kind of the feeling that I get, and I am fairly confident that that's what will take place. The second thing is, like I mentioned, I feel like this is a very advanced fantasy book where the magic system was just very involved in the story, but it was also very complex and just heavily woven into the story. And so that just sometimes gave me a headache as I was trying to follow all of these different rules and remember what all these different techniques and strategies accomplished and how the magic worked as they're throwing out these terms. So the complexity of it was one of the things that made it so immersive, but it also made it a very challenging read for me personally. And this especially happens in the beginning because, like I said, she doesn't hold your hand, so you really just have to pick up on all these things that she's dropping. And eventually you do get a feel for the magic and you do get somewhat comfortable, but man, it is just brace yourself for a really well-developed magic system if you're going to read this book. So the overall score for Petition was an 8.6 out of 10. Just an absolutely incredible story by an incredibly talented author. I can honestly see this book blowing up the same way The Sword of Kaigen blew up a few years ago. So if you like Asian-inspired fantasy, or fantasy that kind of feels like almost like a Red Rising style of competition, you have to give this one a read. You're gonna like it. Now, let's talk about the design. I really like this cover. You get a sense of who Rahilu is with her spear amongst the docks where she's grown up as a fisherman, but you also get that light in the background which feels hopeful, like she's pursuing something better for herself. And I do think that it has that symbolism to it where it encapsulates the story really well with this design, where you have someone looking to the future, looking to a brighter hope, a brighter future for themselves, but they're going to have to work and go through a lot to get that goal. So really like this cover. I think it's really well done. And then I also think, again, the book just takes place in the city, so the map of the city I think is really good, where it's simple. It gives you a good basic layout of where everything is. It kind of gives you an idea of how cramped everything can be, and just really well designed in my opinion. I was able to look back on it and understand where everything was taking place. Yeah, really good. And then it's formatted really well. You get some nice design with the chapter headings. It's formatted really well. But that's pretty much it for the art. But really like it, and I'm really glad to put this one on the shelf. I think it actually will go quite nicely next to our Sword of Kaigen. I think that's appropriate. Yeah, I like that. Thanks so much for watching this book review. That'll do it for today's video. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe so that you never miss out on any of these indie book reviews. And be sure to check out my other book reviews to know what to add to your TBR list to support this indie fantasy community. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.